Today, we're diving into the critical topic of hospice program integrity with our esteemed guest, Katie Wehri. You know, Hannah, a lot of hospice agencies are being hit with Target Probe and Educate and various other audits. This is what I'm excited about this episode. We're going to give agencies the information they need to prepare for these type of audits.
And with Katie's 30 plus years of experience in the healthcare industry, she brings a wealth of knowledge on regulatory affairs, quality, and compliance in hospice and home healthcare. As the Vice President for Regulatory Affairs, Quality, and Compliance at the National Alliance for Care in the Home, Katie is at the forefront of shaping policies and advocating for providers.
Well, get ready for some insightful discussion on the challenges and opportunities in hospice care. Enjoy. Welcome to Home Health Revealed. This is your host, Mike Greenlee. And like always, Hannah Vales in the house. What's happening, Hannah?
Hey, Mike, how are you today?
I'm just living the dream.
Awesome.
Living the dream. What about you?
Well, I don't want to get into too much junk, but I've been having septic issues at my house. So life has been crazy, but I'm getting it taken care of. And I've learned way more about a septic system than I ever cared to know.
Yeah, you can't use certain wipes. Right?
Yes, that I have learned.
And then I'm a house of females. And so, you got to have rules around a lot of stuff.
Can't flush the things.
You can't flush the thingy-majiggers. That's right.
Nope. Nope.
Yeah, that's right. And if you got dogs, you need to have the trash can on top of the counter. I'm just saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You should know that. I mean, I don't know.
My dogs don't ever get in the trash.
They don't eat the craziest things. They don't eat their own stuff. I've seen dogs do that too.
No.
Oh, you must have dogs with great palates then. I don't know.
They're sophisticated.
Yeah. All right. Well, what were we doing today?
Today, we have a very special guest with us. I'm really excited about this guest and our topic. We're going to be talking on the topic of hospice program integrity with Katie Wehri. And she originally came into the hospice space because she was sparked by the inspiration of being a hospice volunteer. Katie has dedicated her 30 plus year career to helping those who care for the most vulnerable populations. She has extensive and direct knowledge of the regulatory, policy, compliance, and operational aspects of hospice and home health providers. She's held executive level positions in multiple healthcare provider organizations across the care continuum. She has shared her expertise as a consultant nationally and is a sought-after speaker. As the Vice President for Regulatory Affairs, Quality, and Compliance for the National Alliance for Care in the Home, she serves as a primary liaison with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known as CMS, state agencies, and other policymaking entities on behalf of the Alliance's home health, hospice, and home care provider members. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Michael, it's great to be with you this afternoon.
Well, we're excited to have you, and what a great resume. I mean, your bio is great. I mean, just the experience that you have, I'm super excited about, what we're going to be talking about and the insights that you're going to be able to provide. So you get a good night's sleep because, we're going to be bombing you here.
We're going into it, right?
Oh, boy,
absolutely.
You just wait. You better buckle up.
I'm ready. I got some caffeine right here. We're ready to roll.
All right. I love it. Well, hospice has been in the spotlight for a while now. With concern about both quality of care and fraud. Can you give us a quick summary of where we are today and how we got here?
Sure, absolutely. So, of course, there's always been oversight of hospices, but that oversight really started to tighten in the early 2000s. But the first event I would say that really, really prompted significant change for hospices were two reports that came out from the Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General in 2019. And those reports highlighted survey deficiencies. Hospices are surveyed every 36 months, make sure they meet those conditions of participation in providing quality of care. And these reports highlighted that there are some condition level deficiencies. A lot of hospices had those. There were some concerns about that. And then there was a supplemental report or a companion report that showed 50 cases of some really questionable care, actually some very poor quality care. And you might remember hearing about those. Those were the cases where we had maggots in feeding tubes, things that you would not expect to see in a hospice patient. Certainly, and they're definitely alarming. Now, it was only 50 cases, but it's still alarming nonetheless. And that really prompted CMS to go back to that survey process, change that survey process to have surveyors really focus more on the conditions of participation and specific ones that CMS identified as being the best indicators to assess quality of care. And then a little something happened to the world called the COVID-19 pandemic.
Never heard
That
of it.
hit,
No.
never heard of it, I'm sure.
Uh-uh.
You're too busy dealing with septics and dog issues, right?
Yes.
Ah,
So that pandemic hit, and during the pandemic, we saw an incredible spike in the number of new hospice providers, specifically in California and even more specifically in LA County. 1,500 new providers in a very short amount of time. And we learned that many of those organizations were not legitimate hospices. And that activity that we're experiencing today, the tighter interpretations on surveys, the more audits that your clients are talking about, more audits in terms of greater frequency and different types of audits, implementation of the hospice special focus program, which, by the way, has been stopped on February 14th while CMS goes back to make some improvements into the program, change its algorithm, that type of thing. But all of what we're experiencing now really stems from those two events going back to 2019 and the pandemic.
So you brought up two important aspects: surveys of hospice programs and audits. These are two most widely used tools to address the issues of quality in care and fraud in hospice. What are you hearing from providers about their recent experiences with these?
Well, certainly they're not sitting back and saying, oh, that was a great experience. I absolutely loved it.
No.
Yeah.
Definitely not. What we are hearing is that a lot of hospices are under multiple types of audits. The one we hear most about is the targeted probe and educate that the MACs are currently conducting, but there's also the SMRC, the supplemental medical review contractor, the RAC, the UPIC audit. Now, I assume all of your listeners are pretty familiar with those types of audits, but they're probably not familiar and haven't had a lot of experience with having simultaneous types of audits occurring or audits in quick succession. One ends and another one begins right away, or at least they weren't familiar with that until probably the past couple of years. And there's, I'd say, hospices in 4 states in particular that are experiencing a lot more than the rest of the nation. I mentioned California had a lot of fraudulent hospices, but there's 4 states that CMS has identified as having more fraudulent providers or higher risk of fraudulent providers, which includes California, Arizona, Texas, and Nevada. So, when fraudulent providers or folks who are intentionally trying to defraud the government are doing something they shouldn't be doing, and they get a little bit of a crackdown, they start moving into other areas. So we saw them moving out of California into some of those neighboring states. But even existing hospices in those states are starting to experience a different type of oversight. For new hospices, there's the provisional period of enhanced oversight, which I know newer hospices and those who have been deactivated and are going through revalidation have experienced. That's really prepay audit. And there's also something called a targeted high-risk hospice audit, and that's for the existing providers in those 4 states. And what we're seeing there is that CMS is really using those audit types to terminate providers. There's been a lot of terminations because of poor performance in those audits. But what's interesting is those audits, the process doesn't really give you a whole lot of time to fix anything. You have a small number of claims that are reviewed. They're reviewed quickly. You don't have a lot of time between having them reviewed and the next pool. So we're seeing actually a lot of terminations, and it's not just new providers. It's providers that have been existing for a while as well. But what we do hear the most about across the nation, most hospices, if they're not experiencing a targeted probe and educate audit right now, they have experienced one, and they will continue to experience those types of audits. They're certainly the most prevalent.
Can you speak to some of the issues providers are experiencing with the TPE process, the targeted probe and educate?
Tons of issues that you hear about for years. We've heard the same kinds of issues with auditors not understanding really what the hospice requirements are for billing, or applying, say, a home health requirement to the hospice requirements for billing. Or conditions of participation. That is pretty consistent across the board, but we're most concerned about the burden that all of that cumulatively puts on providers. They're experiencing a lot of errors by the auditors. Those auditors are not as well informed as they should be about what the hospice requirements are for billing. They're also experiencing that if they have some denials that they have put through the appeals process, depending on how far they go in that appeals process, we're seeing over a 50% overturn rate on appeal, which brings up the question, should this have even been denied in the first place? And that burden that is associated, honestly, for both the provider as well as the MAC that's conducting the audit and CMS ultimately, that's a burden to have to go through that process. It takes time and resources. And with the workforce shortage that we have right now, especially in healthcare, we just don't have the luxury of pulling people out of the field to be dealing with responding to audits and having to go through the appeals process.
We've heard from our clients that sequential billing requirements for hospice impacts the target probe and educate process. Do you have any tips for how they handle this?
This is a tough one. This is a really, really tough one because sequential billing is required. There's no way around that. But there's a couple of lines of thought here. So some of those targeted probe and educate denial reasons are related to what we call technical denial. So something isn't right in the election statement, or something's not right in the certification of terminal illness statement. And it should be something that the providers can correct pretty easily and then continue on billing. But here's a couple things about this process. The intent of targeted probe and educate is to educate. Okay, we're going to identify the problem. We're going to educate the provider on how they can fix that problem. And then we're going to give the provider a period of time where they can work on getting that corrected. Then we're going to pull some more claims and see, did they learn? It's that process where sequential billing comes into play here, because hospices can discharge and readmit the patient. And now I'm saying an administrative discharge and readmit the patient, get all their paperwork cleaned up for that new admission, and then go ahead and submit claims. Or the hospice can say, you know what, we've done a review of all of the claims that we have yet to bill, and we do see that there were some errors here. We're going to go ahead and bill these claims, but we're going to indicate that we recognize there are some days here that are in error, and we're going to code those. It's a code 77 that they put on the claim, but they're coding them to let the MAC know we recognize there's an error here. And there's problems with actually both of those. The issue with the discharge and readmit is there's no code to discharge the patient for an administrative reason to fix an error or fix that election statement or whatever it happens to be. And so the hospice has to use the code that identifies that the patient is no longer terminally ill. So that's artificially inflating their discharge, their live discharge numbers, which is an area that CMS looks at to determine whether or not hospices should be targeted for audits. So there's a problem there. There's also an issue with that code 77 where you're saying, okay, I agree with the error. That could hurt the hospice later on if they're going through the appeal process. So as to how best to handle that, it's going to really be up to the hospice and the risks that they're willing to take. And then there are some hospices that just simply don't bill any more claims.
So if you're a hospice agency, let's say you're doing your billing internal, or let's say you're external, is that a topic that should be brought up before services start at any point in time to say, how are we going to handle this?
Absolutely, especially with a billing company that you may
Hmm.
have or a consulting firm that you are working with. What's their philosophy on how best to handle it? Um, Maybe they say it's a case by case basis. We have to look at what the error is. We have to look at how many claims are involved. We have to look at, how many discharges it would be and what that could potentially do to our organization. But yes, definitely having a conversation about it as you're looking at contracting with folks for services, but also having that internal conversation.
Hmm.
One of the things um, hopefully we'll talk about is, how best to prepare for these types of audits. And you need to have some conversation about, how do we handle this situation? How do we determine how best to handle it? What's our risk assessment going to be? Process for risk assessment.
Yeah. Now I'm assuming CMS understands these two challenges that you mentioned, right? And
They do.
I'm sure you guys have screamed and everything out saying, "Hey, we've got to have a solution," right?
Mhm.
Um, so it seems a little unfair to hospice agencies.
It's incredibly unfair. It's incredibly unfair. And again, it adds to that burden that even CMS has of having to
Hmm.
go through these audits and the appeals process. So we have talked to CMS about this on more than one occasion. And what's been interesting is that they recognize the issue. They say, we agree with you. We should have a code that is for an administrative discharge so we can tell when these types of things are happening.
Hmm.
But what they cite is the difficulty, even within their own system, to get a code approved for that type of use to put on the claim. It's a bureaucratic system,
I know, and it
and
doesn't
and they
shock
feel
me.
it too.
Yeah, it doesn't shock me to add a code. You've got to go up a list of
Mm,
probably 200 people that don't know anything about hospice, let alone probably can't even spell it. And here they are. They just can't come
mhm.
up with a code for crying out loud. I guess
Well, and
so.
as an
I
agency,
get,
then you're stuck in between, do I do the right thing and be as transparent as possible, or do I try
Right.
to maybe hide an issue, skirt by an issue, which that's not what we want either.
yeah, I don't know about you, Katie, but when I get older, I get crankier, you know?
Oh,
I
my family
start, I,
tells me I'm like that all the
yeah,
time.
I start watching documentaries. I don't know where that came from. And now I'm crankier than I've ever been. So every morning I wake up, I'm a 1% crankier than I was yesterday. And then I see stuff like this, and it's like, man, this is a simple solution that could make everybody's lives easier, but they're roadblocked by a code. You know what I mean? It's mind blowing to me because think about all the time, energy wasted, right? With
Right.
both sides. You talk about inefficiency and talk about blowing money, right? I mean, gee whiz, it's I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry, Hannah. I just
Mm,
It's okay. And I think for me, it's probably my super thick rose colored glasses, but I just cannot imagine that there are so many hospices out there trying to commit fraud. I have to believe that most caregivers, most agency owners are in it for the right reasons, are trying to do the right thing. And there's just so much red tape and daily process and operational challenges that all these little things that just bog them down
mm,
become weights that keep them from providing the best care.
and that's exactly what it is. It's a select few ruining it for the others. CMS knows that this is certainly not the majority of hospices, but it's such egregious behavior that they have to go after it. And the way that systems are set up, they have not been able to do it quickly. Now, I will say they've terminated some, but they've not been able to do it quickly, and they've not been able to do it in isolation so that other hospice programs aren't impacted. But all we need is a proper code, as you said, and to get rid of sequential billing, because during that TPE process, you cannot bill the next claim until the other claim is taken care of and adjudicated and all of that. And it's a cash flow, as you mentioned. It's a
yep,
big, big cash flow issue.
yep.
These two things do not seem difficult to solve.
Hmm.
No, we just solved them right now.
I'll just share one story. There's when we think about the fraudsters, and it definitely is not people coming into hospice wanting to care for people and defraud the government. Their intent is to defraud the government, and then let's figure out a way that we can do that. right now, it happens to be hospice. Home health has been through this. DME went through this. And actually, when DME went through this, there was an interview of some folks that had gotten caught, gotten prosecuted for that type of behavior. And it still rings with me what they said as to why they did it. And they said it was too easy. They said it takes too long to get caught, and we don't always go to jail.
Well, I tell you what, I would not be a good prisoner.
Well,
And you know what's crazy is the people that learn to commit fraud, they're actually very intelligent.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you think they
Right.
take that same intelligence and just create a company or something. Boy, it's a lot easier. But I'll tell you what, man, there's a lot of fraud out there. And I think, Katie, you're going to see more and more fraud, especially with AI.
It's easier that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any tools that providers can use to help them identify where they might be vulnerable for some of the targeted audits in our surveys?
Well, a few tools, definitely. You can go to the Max website and look at the types of targeted probe and educate that they're doing. So kind of what areas to look at in your organization, but you've got to be looking internally, kind of have a pulse on how you're performing compared to others. Now, some of the Macs will share information. Actually, one, Palmetto, will share information with you on how you perform on non-cancer length of stay and compare you to your peers in that jurisdiction, which is really helpful. You'll have an idea of kind of where you fall. And it's really when you fall outside the norm that you're at greater risk for being identified. And there's a report that CMS used to provide called the Pepper report. It's a comparative billing report, lets folks know, what are the areas of vulnerability that hospice has identified. They'd have on their long lengths of stay, live discharges, that type of thing. And they showed you how you performed. But at the end of 23, that website just went down. No explanation before it happened. It went down. Then we were told that the peppers were being retooled and there would be eventually a request for information about those pepper reports because there were so many providers saying, I don't fall outside the norm on any of these areas on the pepper, yet I'm getting hit with these audits like crazy. How can that be? What's happening? So in our response that we gave to that request for information about the pepper, we said these need to be better at helping providers understand where they truly are vulnerable. So we're hoping that we will see some of the changes that we recommended to the pepper. We've been told that we will see a pepper report in 25. They were released usually around April. Now, when in 25 we're going to see it, we don't know. We have been told spring, but we were also told fall of 24. So we know that CMS operates on a completely different timeline, but spring for me is coming up. So I'm hoping that we actually see something in April, because I do think that that will certainly help providers. And I know we've spent a ton of time here talking about audits in particular, but there's a couple other areas that I think are areas for potential oversight that folks should be aware of. And of course, there's surveys. You need to be in a constant state of readiness for surveys because that addresses your quality of care. It's the audits, though, that can break your organization like that, because it impacts your cash flow and money. But what we haven't talked about is visit. And when we look at the quality reporting program for hospice, we see that CMS is focused on visits. They're looking at all different types of visits. They're slicing and dicing in different ways. Who's making the visit? How often are they making the visit? How many visits before the patient dies in those last days of life? And there is a new tool coming to the hospice quality reporting program in October of this year called the HOPE, or the Hospice Outcome and Patient Evaluation Tool. And while it's not a clinical assessment tool, it is a tool that hospices can use to help drive the plan of care and the visits that they make. And I think that's a question that hospices really need to be looking at internally and asking themselves, are we making the right number of visits by the right individuals at the right time? They
Yeah.
will have to use the HOPE in terms of they have to complete the tool, submit the information to CMS.
Mhm.
It is intended to help them develop their plan of care, but it is not an assessment tool. So even though it has to be completed, it doesn't have to be used as part of the assessment. It's really a data extraction tool. So it's not driving visits like you would typically see in a nursing home NDS or a home health oasis.
Got it. And is that going to have to be submitted like?
There are time points that will be associated with the HOPE, and the HOPE tool needs to be submitted within 30 days of those time points.
And that starts October 1st, right, of 2025.
It does. It does. And I would say, not that I want to go too far down the quality road there, but what folks really need to look at here is, of course, become familiar with the tool, but look specifically at hospice update visit versus a symptom follow-up visit, and the difference between pain intensity and symptom impact. I know that's a lot, but folks, once they get into the HOPE tool and some documents there, they're going to be able to see what I'm talking about and hopefully generate some discussion internally.
Currently, it's just at admission and discharge.
Correct.
For the HIS.
Right.
And the HOPE biggest difference is that pain management piece, but that also requires agencies to go in and update their processes and really their philosophy on pain.
Pain and symptoms. Any pain or symptom that has a moderate or severe impact on the patient's life and how they're going on day to day. Is it impacting their sleep? Is it impacting their ability to communicate with their family? That impact is what's measured and what's going to drive then whether or not there needs to be changes to interventions and a follow-up visit.
So kind of close out here with, I just got one more question to ask, and gosh, great insight, by the way. Really appreciate all that you shared with us. Do you have any suggestions on how best to handle the additional audits?
I wish I had the magic answer. I really, really do. A couple of things to consider and suggestions for what you need to do internally, I'll share. You do need to have an audit response team. This cannot be something that is relegated to one person in the organization. You need to be able to respond timely and know exactly how to respond. So I think that is something also you need to look at in your organization, even if you're not under audits right now. How would we respond? What are the best practices? How can we be prepared for that? How can we make sure that we have an audit team, even if you're pulling people preferably from the office to handle those audits instead of from the field? But I know sometimes you've got to have some clinical expertise helping you to review those and prepare for those, but getting things in timely. And I'd say the biggest thing to do is make sure that CMS has your most current address on file and contact information, because one of the top denial reasons is that there's been no response to the request, and then the provider says, I never got the request. So make sure that that information is current. Make sure you're looking for the information, and to look electronically, you're going to want to train your billers to go in on a regular basis and look in the DDE system for a status code. It's the status code, I think it's SB6001, because that says this claim's been pulled for an ADR, because a lot of hospices see it there, they never get the notification. So making sure you're set up to receive notice and you've got a team to respond, and that you've got a team that's really, really good at follow through and making sure that they can educate the rest of the folks pretty quickly when you had that education on any errors that you might have had.
That is excellent advice.
Yeah, good to know. Well, Katie, if anybody who is listening has questions or wants to follow up with you, where can you be reached?
I'll give you my email. It's the best way to reach me, and it's KWEHRI, so K Wehri, at allianceforcareathome.org. And yes, I know it's a long one, but we just we have to match what our title is of our organization. So we just had that change. Again, it's K Weary at allianceforcareathome.org.
Well, thank you so much. Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.